Welcome, welcome to each of you, all the folks who have gathered together online, all the folks who are here also in person. This is our Sunday Sounds of Dhamma program, and please go ahead and mute your mics, folks online, if you haven't done that already, everybody except for Claudia. So we have our usual Sunday program, which is about a half an hour of meditation, about half an hour of Dhamma talk, and about a half an hour or less of questions and reflection, and dedication of merit at the end. And before we get started with that, we'll go ahead and make some announcements. Hello, welcome. Yes, please sit anywhere you would like. Feel free to put out another mat or a chair. It's all fine. The couch is fine. Welcome, as you wish. Yeah, so announcements. Let's see, we have, for folks who are local, we have a brunch opening on November 9th. That's not next Saturday, not next Sunday, but a week from Sunday, which reminds me to say that next Sunday is the change, the time change. So we fall back here in the United States. So folks who are joining us from other countries, where there are several of you here today, please make a note that the time will be different next week. Okay, it may or may not be the same for you. And yeah, so we have several things that are open for registration right now. We have the December online class on reflections of the self. We have the November retreat on Buddhist art and what it teaches us or what it shows us about feelings, emotions we might have on the path. And there is now open a January retreat, which is also happening up in Massachusetts at Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, on the 4 factors of stream entry, the 4 factors of leading to the first stage of awakening. So all of those are open on the website, and lots of good activities to partake in. So with that, I will go ahead and begin with the guided meditation today. So for today, yeah, I think for today, I'd like to have us just tune into our senses, really begin to explore how to train the mind to be willing to stay with a particular kind of phenomena coming from one of the sense fields. Most of us have preferences around that, and we pay more attention to some sense fields than others. So we won't go through all 6. There are 6 in Buddhism, but we'll go through a few of them. All right, so just beginning by establishing your meditation posture. Whether you're lying down or you're seated, just feeling the weight of the body on your supports. attuning to the natural stability of the body. And releasing the belly. Really continuing to allow the body to settle right here, right now. And turning the attention to the sensations of touch in the hand, just one hand. Just receiving the sensations as they come into awareness. No need to strain at all. Staying curious about the sensations of touch. Just allowing them to arrive into consciousness. Noticing any shifts in the arising and ceasing of sensation. And now a shift, becoming aware of the sensations of hearing, of sound. Again, just receiving the sensations as they are known. Perhaps noticing the variations in sounds, how they come and they shift and they go. Doesn't matter if they're inner sounds or outer sounds, just receiving. And then shifting to sensations of smell, perhaps very subtle. Can you stay curious about sensations of smell from moment to moment? And one more shift. To turn the awareness to the mind as a sense field. So becoming aware of thoughts. How is it to be aware of thoughts as mere sensations, like a smell or a touch? Resting the attention on mental activity, not trying to change anything at all, just observing thoughts as they arise, are present, and cease. Staying curious about thoughts as sensations in the mind, in the field of awareness. And now, in these last few minutes of the meditation, just allowing the attention to receive each sensation in whatever order it comes, not resting on one sense field, but just taking the sensations one by one as they come from whichever sense organ. sounds and smells, tastes and touch, visual sensations and thoughts, all arising moment by moment. So that bell means that we've arrived at the end of the meditation, and I'm going to go ahead and move directly into the Dhamma talk. But if you have any questions or reflections about the sit, we can take those at the end. Okay, and hello, Chaya. Let me share. So I'm going to begin, as I always do, with the homage to the triple gem. Oh, okay. And everyone is welcome to chant along if you would like. It's in the ancient language of Pali, which may be unfamiliar, but you're welcome to give it a whirl or just let it wash over you. I see that there may be still a few people who haven't muted their mics, so if you haven't done that, folks online, please be sure to have your mics muted. And except for Claudia, who is the interpreter for all the folks here practicing Dhamma in Spanish. So, Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Yesterday, I was part of an event for Buddhist Global Relief. It's an organization that works against hunger and poverty around the world, founded by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. And I was the MC for our annual fundraiser, which I've done for many years. And yeah, I was thinking again, Bhante was talking about how the organization was founded, and an article that he wrote about Buddhists becoming more involved in social action a number of years back. And so I was thinking about that and thinking about, what's really the basis for that? How do we find that within the context of the early teachings and in Buddhism and other traditions, also later traditions of Buddhism? And there are many, many ways to understand this or to think about how it relates to the teachings. But I think the most fundamental one, or perhaps the most simple approach, is to think about it in terms of the precepts, the ethical exhortations, if you will, or ethical guides that we have in all of the Buddhist traditions. Different ones in different traditions. Because while it's obvious that we are really the only ones that we can liberate, we are really the only ones that we can free, it's also obvious that we have a great influence in our world. Sometimes we may feel that that's not true, that we're small and just one person and so on. But if you think about the innumerable acts of a lifetime, you can see how clearly your influence matters. Your presence in the world matters. And the Buddha was very aware of this. I think he passed that along to all of his students, and generations later, we see that time and time again, that idea. That we are influenced by others, and we have an influence on others. And so I brought, as usual, a sutta to share a little bit about this teaching and a little bit about what it means for your practice, perhaps. And it's a sutta from the Numbered Discourses. I don't often teach from the Numbered Discourses, but this happens to be the one. And I'm using this this wonderful text. If you're wondering about social action and social harmony in particular, Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote this lovely book a number of years back. I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, called The Buddha's Teachings on Social and Communal Harmony. And he brought together a number of different discourses in themes, as he has done before for various things. And it's a good one. I refer to this one quite often, actually. But the one that I wanted to speak about today is Numbered Discourse from the Fours. So the Numbered Discourse is grouped according to the number of items in the list that the Buddha presented. So it was a mnemonic device, or like a teaching device for the monks and nuns to be able to remember things, but also that they would have something to teach on a day that ended in a 4, for example, or something like that. So that not being the case here today, but nonetheless. So the Buddha says in this sutta, so this is from the chapter of the Fours, number 99. The Fours are quite long. And I want to say this also, that when we see a list like this, so the Buddha says there are 4 kinds of people in the world. He is not giving, this is not an essentialist view. That is to say, he is not saying that these people are forever condemned to be like this. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that I observe this kind of behavior and this kind of behavior and this kind of behavior and that kind of behavior, right? So that we can begin to distinguish for ourselves what is it that we are doing and what is it that we are observing. Okay? So just to be clear about that, because I think oftentimes it's quite easy to fall into this kind of essentialist view that that person is that thing, period, and that they will never change. That's a mistaken view. No matter how many decades of experience you have of that person being like that, it is still a mistaken view. So the sutta is very short. It says there are these 4 kinds of people. One who is practicing Buddhism, practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, practicing ethics, meditation, and wisdom. One who is practicing for their own welfare or their own benefit, but not for the benefit of others. One who is practicing for the benefit of others, but not for their own benefit. One who is practicing for neither their own benefit or others people's benefit. That's an interesting situation, a sad situation, I would say. And one who is practicing for the benefit of both themselves and others. Right? Now, this is a theme. There are several of these kinds of suttas where then he goes on to talk about this. And I would say in a previous sutta, in one of the earlier ones, he very clearly outlines that the person practicing for both is the highest. That is the highest aspiration of a human life, to be practicing not only for one's own benefit, but to be practicing for the benefit of all beings. All beings. And sometimes you hear different teachers or different traditions or different schools say, we're the ones who practice for everybody, and those guys are more selfish and only practicing for themselves. But I will say that as somebody who has experience across a few lineages, that I've never ever encountered anybody in any Buddhist practice whatsoever who wasn't practicing for the benefit of themselves and others in some way, in some form. Nonetheless, the Buddha says that he did see some people like that. So let's talk about that. So he says this, and so he goes through this and he talks about this in the context of the precepts. And that's why I'm bringing forth this particular sutta. So he says, how is a person practicing for their own welfare, but not for the welfare of others? Well, they would, and he lists them here, the 5, practice the 5 lay precepts of early Buddhism. They abstain from the destruction of life, but they don't encourage others to abstain from the destruction of life. That's how they would be practicing for their own benefit, but not practicing for the others. Or they abstain from taking what is not given. right? So they abstain from stealing or misappropriation. But they don't encourage others to abstain from taking what is not given. They abstain from sexual misconduct, but they don't encourage others to abstain from sexual misconduct. They abstain from false speech, false and harmful speech, actually, so it's usually understood. But they don't encourage others to do the same. And they abstain from intoxication, but they don't encourage others to do the same. So in that way, that person is practicing for their own benefit, but not practicing for the benefit of others. And then he says, then there's that next person who is encouraging others, but not doing it themselves. That's a really hypocritical case, I would say. That's a very bad situation. And you do see that, actually. I say that out loud, and I have seen, unfortunately, people fall into that trap. We could get into that, but I won't right now. And one who's practicing neither for their own benefit or for the benefit of others means they know what the practice is, but they're not actually following the precepts, and they're not actually encouraging other people to follow the precepts either, right? And then finally, the one who is doing the practice and encouraging others. That is the person practicing both for their own welfare and the welfare of others. So that's a very clear statement, right? It's a very clear statement that our practice of ethics, our practice of morality, of making wise and skillful and wholesome choices is our responsibility, but that it doesn't simply end there. That we have this opportunity to also be a voice for that in the world with others. We also have the opportunity to stand up for that in the world. And why? So now the Buddha isn't one to go into the whys very often. He just normally states it as he sees it, right? He calls it as he sees it, and that is what we see in many of the discourses. But why? What is this? So for one thing, we would hope, I hope that other people will be well, that other people will have wholesome and skillful lives, that other people will have the benefits of that in their own lives. Right? That's one aspect. Another aspect is that from a karmic perspective, from the perspective of how this works in terms of our own karmic legacy, so when we do anything with intention, anything with body, speech, or mind with intention, that has a karmic result. There's a Pali word for that. It's called vipaka. Vipaka. So the karmic results are related to the quality of what we've done, the ethical quality of what we've done. That is how it's described in the suttas. We should be clear. It's not just random, and it's not just somebody's decision, some, white-haired being in the sky's decision. It is actually this function, this principle that plays itself out in all things. And so if we want to have beneficial consequences in our lives, we can do things that are good for us. But that has a limited, you could understand that to say, well, there's a limit to that, right? But if you are benefiting more and more and more and more beings, right, then you see also how that generates its own benefit for our karmic results, right? That's also why we have practices like empathetic joy. Empathetic joy is joy in the wholesome joys of other people, right? If you're only joyful when things go well for you or when you're living an ethical life, then you'll have a certain amount of joy. Excuse me, you'll have a certain amount of joy. But if you're joyful for all beings who are doing wholesome and skillful things, then you have an exponentially greater opportunity for joy. Right? So you could say that this is the way in which our practice clearly becomes something which is not a selfish self-improvement project, right? But actually embodying our understanding of how the world works and how the world can work in a skillful, wholesome, ethical way. Mm. So we're really called upon, I think, to be that voice, to do what we can in the world. And later on, in later tradition, what we see, we have this lovely verse that I really appreciate from Zen master Eihei Dogen. So Dogen was the founder of the Soto school of Zen, the school in which I am ordained, and I trained for 38 years now. And so Dogen was early 12th century. He's a Japanese man who went to China actually to learn Chinese Chan Buddhism and bring it back to Japan in its own flavor, you could say. And Dogen commented on each of the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. So the 16 Bodhisattva precepts includes those 5 of the Theravada, and then there are some other aspects that are drawn in there, taking refuge and so on. But he had this to say, and this is one of my very favorite verses from all of Zen. He says, to expound the Dharma, he would have said Dharma because Zen is practiced primarily in Sanskrit rather than in Pali. To expand the Dharma with this body is foremost. The virtue returns to the ocean of reality. It is unfathomable or inconceivable. We just accept it with respect and gratitude. To expound the Dharma with this body is foremost. You have been given the gift of this life, of this body, of the capacity to be a voice for good. Then use it, for goodness sake. Expound the Dharma. Show what you know. The virtue, he says, the virtue returns to the ocean of reality. So this is an interesting statement because it makes it sound kind of like your karma just goes to everybody, but that's not actually how it works, right? Karma is the karmic results of our own actions come into our own karmic stream. That's how it works. You can't trade. It's not like trading cards. So none of that. But what it does mean is that we are embedded in the ocean of reality, right? We live in that ocean of reality. So when we manifest virtue, we are basically kind of putting that into the grid, if you will, right? That's what we do when we stand up in this way of demonstrating the Dhamma with this body, with this life. We put light out into all of this, into connections that are naturally part of our lives. It is unfathomable or it is inconceivable. This is, for me, it's so touching because this is Dogen then tying back to the Buddha, right? So the Buddha spoke about karma and karmic resultants as the imponderables. The Pali word is achintayana, achintayana. And achintayana means something like you cannot put a concept on it. You cannot wrap your mind around it. Even a Buddha, think about the complexity and the vastness of karma. So it's karma in Sanskrit, kama in Pali, just so I'm making myself clear here. The complexity of this vast principle. Sometimes I liken it to gravity. Right? So we know that gravity is a principle that's at work, that has something to do with mass and so on. And we have all these lovely formulas and people who spend their entire lifetime studying it and explaining it. And then every once in a while you read something in the magazine and say, well, we thought it worked like this, but actually what we see is it works more like that, right? And we're still learning about gravity. And in the same way, karma is this incredibly vast, complex principle that we can understand to a degree, and we are working with it, whether we like it or not, through our intention. And we can learn about it from the teachings that we have received and from what we see in our lives. But ultimately, the idea is not to create a concept out of it, but to live it, to live within it, to know that what you do matters and to live according to that. So this unfathomability that Dogen is referring to is that about karma, that don't underestimate the impacts of what you do with intention. It's unfathomable. It's inconceivable. How vast, how complex the impacts of your life. So be thoughtful about that, right? Be thoughtful about it. And then this last line, we just accept it with respect and gratitude. Accepting the virtue, accepting the workings, accepting the results of these skillful choices that we make, accepting the results of living a life of standing up in a way that's informed by, that's expressing our understanding of Dhamma, our deep knowing of that. Wow, it's powerful. It's really powerful. It's powerful at an individual level, and it's powerful at a group level. You're here. We're all part of this Sangha. We can support each other to make these kinds of choices, to live these kinds of lives. And I'm almost at the end of my talking time, but I'm going to keep talking anyway, because there's one more story that I wanted to share with you. And I'll try to keep it brief here, because it's not only about the Sangha. It's not only about us as a community. That is a beautiful support, if you will, and an inspiration, if that works for you. But it's also about how we are with other people who disagree with us, other people who don't understand the world in the way that we do. So there's a beautiful story. It's written up in a book called Not by the Sword by an author, Catherine Watterson. And she wrote a story about Rabbi Weiser and his wife, Julie Weiser. And they were in New York and they moved out to Lincoln, Nebraska to get away from anti-Semitism. They thought, oh, we'll go out, to another part of the country. And it turns out that there's a man there, Larry Trapp, who was a grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. So for folks who are not American, maybe it's helpful to say that the Ku Klux Klan is known as the KKK. They are a racist organization since I don't know when, since maybe late 1800s or early 1900s, a long, 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 long time. People who would do these bonfires and put on these white masks, pointed, tall hats, masks, things, and white robes, and terrify, especially Black people. Hangings, many hangings, many bombings, many horrific acts. So anyway, so Larry Trapp was there in Lincoln, Nebraska, and he was a KKK Grand Dragon. A Grand Dragon is like one of their top officials, I suppose, I guess. And so he started harassing the Wisers. As soon as he heard that they were in town, he started calling them and, saying all kinds of horribly racist things to them on the phone. And Rabbi Weiser would respond by saying, Larry, there's a lot of love in the world, and you're not getting any of it. Like, really, how is this helping? Right? And he basically would not be intimidated by him. Larry was actually wheelchair bound. He and his wife, Julie, Rabbi Weiser and his wife, Julie, went to, asked if they could bring him some groceries because they heard that he had trouble grocery shopping in his wheelchair. They actually had dinner with him numerous times, and of course, many conversations. He had pictures of Hitler up on the wall and automatic weapons in his house and such. And they had many conversations. And eventually, Larry Trapp left the KKK, repented of all that he had done, and wrote letters to all of his former friends who were still in that organization, telling them how wrong they were and how they were doing something wrong in the world, something bad that they should stop doing.
He also converted.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. Larry Trapp actually converted to becoming a Jew, and he lived with the Wisers for some period of time. I haven't read the whole book, but I've read articles about it. So Chaya's telling us this. She obviously knows something about it. So it's a beautiful story, and it's a beautiful example of how, just think about that first time that Rabbi Weiser picks up the phone, and there's a whole stream of expletives coming at him and racist slurs. Right? The choice that he makes in that moment matters. So I hope that that you consider this, that you really think about how to expound the Dharma with this body and this voice and this mind. How to stand in your place in the world and be that presence. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing here. All right, friends, that is the end of my talk for today. And that means it's time for reflections or questions or, yes, Chaya, please hand the mic there. That's the top of it, that little round part.
Hope everybody can hear me through my mask.
Speak up, please.
Okay.
Okay, and slowly because they're translating. Claudia's translating.
Okay. My question is how to avoid the opposite of, uh, nobody can stand people who think they
Mm.
they know it and you don't, and or people who are preachy, or I just the smugness or the self-righteousness or the judgmentalism or whatever, like, it's one thing to live it and let, I'm sorry, let people see that you have something, and then talking to them if they ask you a question. But where's the line? He said, if you don't share it, if you don't, then, I mean, Buddha was saying in your story, that we have to share it. Where's the line on sharing it without being smug or whatever?
Yes, it's a very good question. So it can go to the other side, from indifference to arrogance, right? Or to kind of, as you're saying, smugness, or
appearing that way, at least.
yeah, or just, a kind of judgmentalism about other people, right? This is a real problem, a real thing to consider, issue to consider. And I would say the key thing for me personally, when I think about it, and the way that uh, you know I would understand it in terms of Dhamma, is something like, back to this issue of non-essentialism, right? We're not saying that um, a person is that thing, just like Larry Trapp. He wasn't that thing. He was behaving as a racist for a long time and acting as a racist, but that's not an essential part of his nature, any more than us being upright and being ethical is an essential part of our nature, right? We make those choices, we stand up, we do the thing. Generally speaking, I would say Buddhists have taken the approach of, we offer the help and then we see if people come for it, or we offer the opportunity and then we see if people come for it. That said, there is, I think about like orphanages and, all kinds of social action, schools and all kinds of activities that actually are being done. So I think that it comes down to really just, trying to enact the good, not assuming that people are flawed in some way that they can't change, but also giving them the opportunity to make that choice, because they are the ones that have to make that choice, right? Ultimately, they are the ones that have to make that choice. And I would say, we also have to, I think, be very strong to stand against harm. And this is something that can be much more harsh. But I was in an abusive relationship, for example, and I had to at some point say, no, that's not okay. You cannot do that. There will be consequences. And sometimes, and we have to understand that in the sense of, like, we are actually doing a compassionate thing for another person if we can convince them in some way, or sometimes if we block their possibility of doing harm, of doing more harm. We're actually helping them not to create more harmful karma for themselves. But you're right, there is, we have to be very thoughtful about, are we giving them the opportunity, or are we using this kind of sledgehammer or this kind of judgmentalism, like, there's something wrong with you? Those are where are, I would say, not really very skillful approaches.
I guess you'd also have to keep in mind that there are more ways than one to be good.
Yes, there are more ways than one to be good, and that's an important way to keep, exactly, right? So, and this I think is actually something that oftentimes can bring people to the table. If we can talk about shared values, rather than like get caught up in the implementation in the beginning, but just talk about shared values. What are we trying to accomplish here that we can agree on, right? That is a skillful, wholesome thing. And then we can find that common ground of how to do it, or agree that there are different ways to do it, and that's okay. Yeah. Yes, Claudia, let's see.
Hola, ya.
Hola.
¿Cómo era? ¿Lo hacíamos en español
I
primero?
think if we say it in English now, then
Okay.
I put you back on the interpretation and you say it in Spanish for the folks, huh? Or
Okay.
no, we say it in Spanish now.
Okay. And then you translate it in English, and
Then
then
I
I
translate in English,
Spanish
then
for
you.
the recording.
Okay, está bien.
So we say in Spanish, right? Pensaba un poco en ahorita que hablaba Hansa, en la intención, que también es bien importante, como cuando haces algo, saber cuál es tu verdadera intención. O sea, como, ¿no? Si mi intención es que
Sí.
estoy cansada de que hagas las cosas de esa manera, entonces lo que quiero es que las hagas de otra, o si realmente mi intención es algo beneficioso para ti, ¿no?
Sí,
Que creo que la
bonito.
intención ahí juega un papel
Sí,
importante. Y
súper.
también creo que a veces no vamos a tener la sabiduría, o sea, es como, ¿no? ¿Cómo estoy ofreciendo las cosas en general, ¿no? Para alguien que quiero que no se siga haciendo daño, porque justo ayer hablaba con mi prima de eso, porque vivimos juntas, y mi mamá estaba diciendo que siempre le está diciendo a mi tío qué hacer, y le dije, ma, mi tío se va a cansar de que le digas qué tiene que hacer, ¿no? Si yo le estuviera diciendo a mi prima qué hacer, y mi prima a mí, sí, ya te hubiera corrido, me dice mi prima, pero en broma, ¿no? Pero sí es como esta sabiduría de en qué momento sí, cuál es la intención, ¿no?
Gracias por la
Gracias a ti, Aya.
invitación. Okay. Great. So what Claudia was saying was that the intention is also very important, right? What is the intention that we're bringing to this interaction with this person, for example? Are we really intending to help them in some way, or to bring some clarity to the situation? Or are we just fed up with whatever's going on, or, acting out our anger or whatever, right? If we are careful about our intention, then that also is helpful in terms of discerning when's the right time, because she's saying we have to, there's a degree of wisdom involved in knowing when is the right time to speak and how to speak to people about things. Also, there's also a very beautiful sutta about that. The Buddha saying, if you're going to say something, especially something that the other person doesn't want to hear, he says, if it's true and it's beneficial and it's spoken in goodwill, you still have to find the right time to say it. You still have to find the right time to say it. So that comes from our wisdom about, again, about our intention and about what is it that we are trying to, what kind of wholesome quality are we trying to foster? Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Claudia. And she's giving the example of her aunt. Yeah. Michelle has her hand up.
Yes, I was going to say, I appreciate you sharing the story about the rabbi, because I really struggle with this. I feel, there's that sort of famous James Baldwin quote about we can disagree as long as like your disagreement doesn't deny my humanity. And that's where I struggle right now. I feel like a lot of the discourse right now is about denying people's humanity. So I appreciate this story. It's nice to hear something that is hopeful in this moment.
Good. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the James Baldwin quote, and I appreciate James Baldwin in general. And you know, actually, those are the most important times for people to really face one another, encounter one another. You know, when there is that dehumanization happening, like, no, actually, we're talking about humans. We need to really stay in this conversation. But I hear that it's hard also, Michelle. It's definitely hard, and it can be very painful. You know, I think, and I see your hand up, Richard, so I will get to you in just a second. But I want to say there can be a feeling right now, especially about suffering, unnecessary suffering, that there's suffering and trauma that is happening that could have been avoided. And I understand that perspective, but I would say from the Dharma perspective, what is happening because it must, because the conditions are such. If we want it to be different, we need to change the conditions. Just like when somebody dies, we cannot say they died too early. They did not die too early. They died at the time they were meant to die because the conditions were such. And that can be hard for us to accept, but that is how it works. So if something is going to be different, then we need to change the underlying conditions. Yeah. Richard.
I've been participating in the protests, and we kind of are in an abusive relationship with our government at the moment. It is denying people their humanity. So I was a friend we were talking about this with a friend this week, and she said that, as a Buddhist, isn't it divisive to attend a protest, knowing that signs may make people upset because they hold a different view than I do, right? Or that I'm holding a view, right? But at the same time, this is an act of peaceful civil disobedience. So it's just one of those things. It's like, how can you, my intention is good, I believe, to attend. It's been a very joyful experience, which is really interesting. But the idea is it is divisive, but at the same time, well, 2 weeks ago, I was holding up a sign that was given to me by Indivisible, and it showed a mother and a daughter who were obviously people of color. And below it said the name of this person and how they were disappeared in America. And I felt like I was holding their lives in my hand as I held this sign on the street corner. So it's like, so, what your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, you bring up many issues there, Richard. I think that oftentimes what I see, sadly, at demonstrations are personal attacks. And I think that that is not really helpful, nor is that something that I would support. And I feel like that isn't actually in keeping with the precepts. That said, we do sometimes need to say things that people are not going to receive well. That is what we were just talking about that, right? There are some times when we are going to have a view about something that other people don't share or that they don't receive well. And I think the teachings are abundantly clear that that is something we need to do. If people are breaking the precepts, we need to actually be clear about that, say that, point that out when we see it in the world.
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that we should be afraid of people's reactivity. I think we need to, again, keep it out of the personal attack and talk about, and this, those of you who are therapists in the room will recognize this very clearly. Talk about the difference between calling a person a problem and calling a behavior a problem. That choice, that decision, that policy, that behavior, that's a problem. That's we need to say that when that's true. But to attack that person, that's another situation. That's not okay. We're actually back to also Claudia's reflection, right? Can we speak in ways that are actually with the intention of helping? And if we do that, then by all means, protest, help, be that voice, right? Be that voice. I remember years ago, we were going to a climate march, and it was a group. I was helping out a Sangha whose teacher was dying up in New York, in New Rochelle, New York, about an hour north of New York City, maybe a little less than that. And so we were going, a big group of the Sangha from many different Sanghas and communities were getting together in New York City. We were going to ride a bus down to DC and do the big climate march that was happening. What's 2017, 2018, around that time, 2016. And I happened to get assigned to the same bus as Venerable Bodhi. So Bhikkhu Bodhi and I, and this other Black gentleman who was with one of the Pure Land schools, I believe. So there were 3 Dharma teachers per bus, basically, was how it was. And there were like 10 buses of us all going down to Washington, D.C. And so I thought, oh, great, I'm going to have to speak right before Bhikkhu Bodhi this. It was the first time that I was co-leading anything with him. But this other gentleman went first, the Pure Land teacher went first, and he said something that was really beautiful and very devotional, I thought. And then I got up and I told this story that maybe some of you have heard about saving the fish that hopped out of the creek, and a little bit about how we take action to preserve life, or we take action to do various things in the world. And then Bhikkhu Bodhi stands up and he's like, and those oil corporations, they have to stop. And, he got up and was just like, a kind of classic, social activist speaker. And he just got up there with a lot of fire and brimstone. It was like, no, and this thing has to stop, and that thing has to stop. And those people are destroying XYZ thing, and they need to stop doing that. And he was very, very adamant and very powerful. And you see him, maybe you saw a taste of that now. He's much older now, but saw a taste of that yesterday at the event toward the end there. And he gave his reflections. So we don't need to be meek and mild necessarily either. There are many different approaches. Yes, Brad.
I won't use names, but over the past week, there's been something going around where interviewers were trying to get a certain person to declare that another person was evil. And the person being questioned just wouldn't go there. Probably because the whole thing of the word essentialism, like to reduce somebody to, you can say someone's actions are evil, that was, but to say this person is evil, and then the interviewers turn around and say, well, that's what's wrong with you. You won't say that they're evil. That's what's wrong with your party. They won't say that, that kind of stuff. And it's that is not helping to unite anybody. That's just creating more division as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah. unfortunately, the world, the understanding of many people in the world is not going to coincide with a sound Dharma ethical understanding. So yes, you may get criticized for doing the right thing or saying the right thing. And even to say somebody's behavior is evil, I would say I would want to be more specific than that, just to say, hey, that person, is more children are dying. So this was a statistic that was thrown out yesterday. One additional child in the world is dying every 3 minutes and 37 seconds because of certain decisions that have been taken recently. That's a very, very clear, okay. So you see the harmful impact of that, right? And that I think to the degree that we can do that and speak that way and address those things is much more helpful. So yeah, unfortunately, though, it is true that sometimes people don't understand or don't agree or will criticize you for even taking up the side of non-harming. It's very true. All right, we have arrived basically toward the end of our time here. So Miss Dana, if you are available, we're in the middle of our fall fundraiser. So Dana's announcements are ever more important this time of year.
Okay. Giving to the Dassanaya Buddhist Community supports our guiding teacher, Dhammadīpā, the physical location at the vihara, and allows us to continue to offer Buddhist teachings in support of the awakening of all beings. It's particularly joyous right now during Dassanaya's fall fundraiser. Our support pages are on the website under the support tab, donate, volunteer, or offer materials. Thanks everyone for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. And yes, thanks everyone for being here today and for all of your practice, your generosity, your ethics, your presence in the world, your kind speech, kind thoughts. May we and all beings know ourselves as Dhammas. May we find wisdom to meet all of our lives and all the beings we encounter. May we be supported by the Sangha and the Dharma and the Buddha. And may we and all beings ultimately be liberated from every form of suffering and delusion, and we might know true peace. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddha nubhavena sabba dhamma nubhavena sabba sangha nubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. All right, everyone. Good to see you.
Muchas gracias, Claudia, gracias.
Thank you for your teaching.
Gracias, Amparo. Thank you.
Gracias, Claudia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your reflections.
Buen día.
All right, everybody.